December 2nd, 2022. This week, I took a trip to a remote train station in Japan, and then from there, a 1 hour car drive to the mountains to meet the head of an ancient secret society known as the Yatagaras, or the three-legged crow. It was very interesting to me indeed. Now, the Yatagaras refers to a three-legged crow that legend says guided the very first people to Japan in ancient times. And it is basically at the head of the Shinto religion. Now, the story I heard was really fascinating. The members of the Yatagaras claim that they are the descendants of one of the lost tribes of Israel known as the tribe of Ephraim. Forgive me if I pronounced that wrong. As well as some members of the priestly Levi tribe. And just like some rabbis can recite the list of their predecessors going all the way back to Moses, these people claim that they can recite a list of their ancestors going back over 100 generations to Joseph back in Egypt in those ancient days. And if you look at the earliest Japanese religious writings, they're almost identical to the first parts of the Old Testament of the Bible. And they're also sun worshippers, just like the Egyptians. And furthermore, when the Shinto people take out their shrines once a year, again, that is ancient Egyptian solar religion. So they have a legitimate claim to be the descendants of ancient Egyptian ruling lineages, or Jacob, as they claim. Now, these people, they don't have last names. They don't pay taxes. They're not in any government register. Apparently, although many of them are rich, they were the traditional ruling class. The imperial Japanese family are members. None of them have last names, by the way. As you hear about the Emperor Hirohito, but never his last name, because he doesn't have a last name. In any case, some of them are actually poor. I've even heard some of them have to engage in prostitution in order to make a living. But in any case, they are the secret power of Japan. And they had an interesting offer. Oh, one more thing I want to say to make me think this was a legitimate thing. The place I went had in it what they claimed was the original throne of the Ming emperors of China. It was huge, big enough to seat 3 large people, and it was made of solid gold. And I mean, 2 people, me and another person, tried to lift. We couldn't even budget like a fraction of a fraction. It just was so heavy. And it was very ornate. They wouldn't let me photograph it because they said the Chinese would then start asking for it. But these people are the real deal. In any case, the reason I was called was because they had an offer to make. They claim that the Japanese royal family has $5 trillion worth of gold in the vaults in Switzerland. Right now, the only person who's authorized to access it is the Empress Dowager Michiko. And she can only do it via the Red Cross. And at present, it can only be done to deal with emergencies such as earthquakes and stuff. In other words, the sort of thing the Red Cross gets involved in. So the proposal they're making is that they use this $5 trillion worth of gold as backup to set up a future planning agency to take over some future economic and social and environmental planning for the planet. And to do this, we need the cooperation of the Swiss and the families that own the private central banks, et cetera, et cetera. And so I have started the process of trying to get this negotiations forward. Now, the other thing I would point out is that they let me bring my mobile phone with me, which means that they were fully aware that the NSA was listening into our conversation. It means that they are willing to go public to a certain extent about their secret society, and I think it's very interesting. If they have a very legitimate sounding claim to being one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So this is quite historical in my view. And I'm honored to have been allowed to, start discussing these people to the world at large. So that's the situation there. Now, again, with this gold business, they claim that all these stories about huge gold hoards in Indonesia and the Philippines, etc., are not true, but that their gold is real. They took it from the Tokugawa family, and it's in Switzerland. Now, another thing, these people tell me that everything we've been taught about the recent history of Japan is fiction. So, for example, they claim that the big battle of Sekigahara never took place, and that there was actually a battle called the Battle of Yamanaka, where Tokugawa Ieyasu, the first shogun, was killed, and that they used a body double to represent him when they took over Tokyo. Again, I don't know. I'm not an expert in Japanese history, but I just throw that out there, just for future scholarship to look into. In any case, I hope this will be the item that can break the current deadlock. Now, I'll get into more detail when I write my weekly report on this meeting, but now I want to talk about the world situation. Basically, I think it's time to step back because everything is in kind of a holding pattern right now. And we need to examine what each side holds. On the Western side, the families that control the Western central banks, what do they control? Well, they control the BIS, the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, the Fortune 500 companies, and they control a lot of the, traditional international institutions. However, now let's look at the other side, the people around the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, this is basically an alliance between what used to be the communist Soviet Union bloc and the non-aligned countries. So it includes China, Russia, India, basically about 82% of the world's population and 65% of the world's GDP. And they are not accepting any more fiat dollars created by the Khazarian mafia or the families that control the West. And this is resulting in the economic implosion we're witnessing in the United States and Europe now. Now, things are going to get worse over the next coming weeks. The Russians are waiting for the ground to harden in the Ukraine, and they're going to send in a 700,000-man army. And I've heard they're going to go all the way to Paris. They're not going to stop in the Ukraine, and they're going to go into Switzerland too. So I strongly recommend for the Rockefellers and Rothschilds holed up around Lake Geneva and hiding around New York, etc., that they start to seriously get off their high horse and negotiate while they still have anything to negotiate with, because time is running out. And the world is aware that they tried to kill everybody with vaccines and bioweapons and failed, and now they're going to face justice. There's no way around that. Another thing I'd like to point out is the Chinese have been informed that the draconian anti-COVID lockdowns are part of a plot to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party, and the latest reports are they've realized this now, and they're going to end this whole zero COVID nonsense policy, and they're not going to buy Rockefeller poisonous vaccines either. The same is happening in Japan. And getting back to Japan, another thing I should mention about my meeting with the Yatagaras is they said that one of the reasons why they hadn't tried to make Japan independent again was that they had received threats that Tokyo would be destroyed, plunged into the ocean. If they tried that, and they would blow up Mount Fuji. I explained to them that immediately after the Fukushima nuclear and tsunami terror attack, there were hundreds and hundreds of earthquakes reported around the island of La Palma in the Pacific Ocean, and that if that had continued, it would have led to a tsunami that would have destroyed the east coast of the United States. 100-meter, 100-yard or so tsunami would have wiped out, Florida, New York, etc. And so they backed off. And I explained to them that if these Satanists try to attack Japan again, there will be retaliation. We will destroy the area around Lake Geneva. We will destroy Jerusalem and one other place. We'll decide later. But the point is that they're not going to be able to terrorize their way out of the situation. This is something that has to be negotiated peacefully. If you shoot us, we'll shoot you. Okay, so it's a mutually assured destruction situation. So that's not on the negotiating table. So again, things are now stuck in a holding pattern, but there are high-level negotiations taking place under the surface. And if the Khazarian mafia do not surrender, then there will be military action. We will have to continue removing them from this planet. And there's nowhere either on or off the planet for them to hide. Okay, well, that's what I have to say for myself this week. Now I'd like to answer questions from readers and viewers.
Hi, Ben. We have our first question for today. Would you address what will happen to the medical field when everything is cleaned up? During the pandemic, public hospital systems, which include the physicians' group practices associated with those systems, were given large amounts of COVID relief funding in exchange for adhering to government protocols rather than making their own treatment decisions. Many larger hospital systems were able to buy out smaller systems and private systems that did not want to comply with protocols. The result of that was nearly all doctors following orders, and many still continue to follow the same orders. I still have many friends who work in the medical field, including a couple pharmacists who are administering the shot. What are your thoughts on this?
There's going to have to be a very major overhaul of the Western medical system. Essentially, this goes back to the Rockefellers over 100 years ago when they set up medical associations, and they basically suppressed all types of medicine except the ones that followed their orders. And so the heads of the medical associations, the Rockefeller family, all these people will have to face legal punishment for what they did. And most doctors go into the profession with a sincere wish to help people. So there will be major reform, and the essential idea is that from now on, Western medicine will basically be centered around the idea that the healthier people get, the more money doctors make. Right now, it's the opposite. The sicker people get, the more money doctors make. That's why we have so much evil in the pharmaceutical industry. I call it the pharmaceutical industry on purpose, as you know. And there is so much corruption in the medical establishment. This was exposed for all to see with the COVID, use of money and, blackmail to force the medical establishment to break their Hippocratic oath. Again, forgive me if I don't pronounce that right. But there's going to have to be an overall major reform. However, I remain confident that 90% of doctors are good, ethical people who really do have the interests of their patients at heart. So, it'll only be the corruption at the top that'll be reformed, and then the system will be reformed. But yes, a major overhaul of Western medicine is going to be needed and will happen. Next question.
Hi, Benjamin. I was listening to your video today. This is from the video last week. I was intrigued when you said the USD is backed by gold and assets, so it is valuable, but the KM dollars clearly not backed by gold and assets are worthless. This implies to me that all dollars created since 1971, when the US came off the gold standard, are worthless. Can you comment on this, please, and explain how the new KM dollars will be differentiated from pre-1971 dollars?
Okay, well, actually, what happened was that after 1971, with the Nixon shock, the nations of the world did accept U.S. dollars in exchange for oil, and that continued until 2008 when we had the Lehman shock. At that point, a decision was made by the Asians. And this is the group that, controls about 82% of the world's population and 65% of GDP, said we're no longer going to accept newly created dollars as payment for goods. And what happened was that the Rockefellers and Alan Greenspan panicked, and they offered to put a black communist by the name of Barack Obama as president and change their ways. In exchange, the Asians agreed to sell 700 tons of gold owned by Mr. Johannes Riady to the Rockefellers and their group. And this was leveraged 1,000 times to create $23 trillion. That money kept the U.S. Corporate government going until January 31st, 2020. At that point, it ran out, and they were not accepting new dollars as payment. And so they were given until mid-February to come up with the money. They didn't. And what happened then was the Khazarian Mafia, the Rockefellers and stuff, they laundered their money through this incredible COVID thing. They used the World Bank, the IMF, politicians, and they just pumped money through the system. So the COVID thing was a giant money laundering operation using the medical establishment to create this nightmare. But nonetheless, despite this, the dollars that were created by these people could not be used to pay for oil, cars, computers and stuff that really existed. And this whole COVID thing is now blowing up in their faces. But in any case, so I'm saying the dollars created by the Khazarian Mafia after January 31st, 2020 were laundered through this COVID business, but could not be used elsewhere. Now, what's been happening since then is they've been selling all their massive weapon stocks, money laundering via this Ukrainian war. But that's also, all the nations are reporting they're running out of money stocks. Now they can't get oil, they can't get gas, the ports are stopped. So I don't know what they're going to try next, but whatever it is, it's not going to work. So the answer is, it's not just the dollars after 1971. There is a large group of dollars created after that are now backed by a basket of assets, including gold. And you can confirm this by looking at the relationship between the price of gold and the dollar in recent years. Okay, next question.
In your opinion, what exactly is the KM's main source of income?
Their main source of income is money laundering through their privately owned central banks via the Fortune 500 corporations, but they also make huge amounts of money from the arms trade, the drug trade, human trafficking, and extortion from governments around the world. I would have to say that's what they make their money from. Next question.
Is there still a dark hat shadow government in Britain? And if so, how do we get rid of Rishi?
There is a dark hat shadow government. It's headed by Chief Cabinet Secretary Simon Case and some members of the Rothschild family. And basically, you need to arrest these individuals and cut off their communications. And then Rishi Sunak can either be removed or forced to follow new orders. But yeah, you can see from the actions that he's trying to raise taxes and lower expenditures so he can keep supporting his masters, who are not the British people. But again, go after Simon Case, arrest him and question him and find out his whole network and remove them from the British body politic. And then England shall be free again. Next question.
We have our last question here today. Ben, you say the Chinese government is a joke with their zero COVID policy. Why don't you talk about how they're imprisoning hundreds of thousands of people, how they're locking up toddlers in isolation, how the Chinese people are revolting against this tyranny right now and having their COVID QR codes turn red so that protesters will be dragged to the camps. This tyranny is not a joke, it is genocide, yet you are making light of it. It is not about masks and PCR tests and how ridiculous the COVID policy is. It is about the imprisonment of great swaths of Chinese population. Why don't you tell your audience about the plan to bring the system of lockdown and QR codes to the Western world?
Actually, I did contact Asian secret societies about them, and I explained to them that this whole crackdown in China was a plot by the KM to overthrow the Chinese government by creating such ridiculous suppression that the Chinese people would revolt and overthrow their government. I pointed out that these drastic measures were being taken to fight a disease that wasn't killing large amounts of people, and that it was a trap. And I understand that they are now undoing this whole thing. So we'll see. But yeah, the Chinese Communist Party was following the KM agenda of giving everybody a mark of the beast number and trying to create a system of total control, which the KM was hoping to spread to the rest of the world. But I understand the Chinese people and even at high levels of the government have now revolted against this, and you should see that unwind over the coming days and weeks. But I have talked about it, and I did talk to the Asian secret societies and tell them it was a trap and that they should do something about it, and I believe they're going to do something about it. But if not, you can be sure I won't be silent about the repression of the Chinese people. All right, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you again next week.
Back to DOGE just for a second. Earlier, the subcommittee headed by Chairman Marjorie Taylor Greene, her and her staff discovered $2.7 trillion in improper payments to Medicare, Medicaid, overseas, to people who should not have gotten it. Some of this room might have missed that press conference. Can you elaborate on what the president is thinking at this point?
Well, again, that's another example. There's a very long list of the fraud, waste, and abuse that DOGE is identifying on a daily basis. Elon Musk also talked about yesterday about Social Security payments that are going out the door for people who are no longer with us. Unfortunately, I would say that is certainly fraud. There's also a lot of contracts they've identified that, just as a hypothetical example, are $1 million, but only 500,000 went out the door. So where's the rest of that cash? And so that's the thing. Those are the things that DOGE is working on every single day. And I would just remind everybody in this room, this is what President Trump campaigned on doing. He's delivering on a promise that 70.
And swear by my name like they taught my people of Israel to swear by Baal. If they do not obey, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation. They're all listed in this prophecy written 3,000 years ago by the prophet Asaph. Asaph was a worship leader for King David, but we're also told he was a seer, a prophet. 2 Chronicles 29, verse 30. And he, at a time when Israel was, had won, as he's going to, the Arab peoples had, over the diaspora, had gone into the promised land of Israel. It was called Palestine in 135 AD. It was renamed Palestine. Never was really a country. It was always loosely defined borders, depending on whoever controlled the area. But it was called Palestine, and then in 1948, it became Israel. And so he was saying, I'm going to pluck out the evil neighbors from what is now going to be called Israel, put them back into their ancient homelands. And I'm going to pluck the Jews out who were living in some of those Arab countries there, lands, and bring them back into what is now going to be called Israel. So we saw that happen in 1948. Now, what he had to do, the Ottoman Empire had controlled the Middle East from 1517 to 1917. There could be no Arab states or Israel with them having control over that area. So in World War I, they got defeated, the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. And all of a sudden we find in the 20th century, the Arabs starting to get their states back. So for instance, Egypt was 1922, got its statehood. Saudi Arabia and Iraq were 1932. Iran, formerly Persia, was called Iran in 1935. Lebanon 1943, Jordan and Syria 1946, and then along comes Israel 1948. So we see that they're all listed in this prophecy written 3,000 years ago by the prophet Asaph. The Arab states got their statehood. This is a sovereign act of God. He said he would put them back into their lands. I'll continue to read these verses and show you how that plays out.
Yeah, now,
All right, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you again next week.
Back to DOGE just for a second. Earlier, the subcommittee headed by Chairman Marcia Taylor Greene, her and her staff discovered $2.7 trillion in improper payments to Medicare, Medicaid, overseas, to people who should not have gotten it. Some of this room might have missed that press conference. Can you elaborate on what the president is thinking at this point?
Well, again, that's another example. There's a very long list of the fraud, waste, and abuse that DOGE is identifying on a daily basis. Elon Musk also talked about yesterday about Social Security payments that are going out the door for people who are no longer with us. Unfortunately, I would say that is certainly fraud. There's also a lot of contracts they've identified that, just as a hypothetical example, are $1 million, but only 500,000 went out the door. So where's the rest of that cash? And so that's the thing. Those are the things that DOGE is working on every single day. And I would just remind everybody in this room, this is what President Trump campaigned on doing. He's delivering on a promise that 70